Howdy goons, it's way too early to fully and properly review the Switch 2, but I'm going to give you some first impressions, and it is super detailed. I've been playing all day on launch, and I'm sharing first impressions and experience with the Switch 2. I got my Switch around noon on launch date, the 5th, yesterday, but it was delivered around 7:30 a.m. I had just went to bed at 6 a.m. because I couldn't sleep, too excited. Turns out I could have just stayed up just a little bit longer and I would have had it. Anyway, I got it from the Walmart, and they sent me a free Coke and spicy Pringles with a thank you letter, from them. Basically, it just said, "Thank you for ordering, gamer. Hope you have a gamer-tastic time in Gamerville. Here's some chips and pop." It was nice. Doesn't make a dent in the $500 console, but it was still a nice surprise. The system. I immediately set up my streaming stuff and live streamed opening and testing it live. I still have the live stream up if you want to see that. Out of the box, the Switch 2 is pretty nice, essentially no bezels, which is kind of impressive. The Joy-Con have a wonderfully lightly sandy texture that feels odd, but good in the paws. The rounded edges make for a nicer hand feel versus the Switch 1. The Joy-Con aren't ergonomic though, which is something I would really like. That's something that I think the Steam Deck has over the Switch devices still, is that the control pad is it's much more ergonomic. Since they're not ergonomic, they're essentially just smooth aside from the buttons. It's unfortunate, but one of the many sacrifices you have to make for maximum portability. But at this size, you're not getting maximum portability. It's a unit. They probably should have accepted that this isn't portable and it wasn't going to be portable. You'll find that a lot of things were sacrificed for portability, but it's mostly just stuff that the Switch 1 was already doing. The Joy-Con still feel too small despite being bigger, and the lack of ergonomic design is most prevalent when using the mouse mode. It's way too thin to be a comfortable mouse alternative. At times, the mouse would want to tip over more than it would want to slide because it's too thin and tall. I think those who want to play Metroid Prime with the mouse are going to want to get a peripheral to widen it. The lack of this baby having any back can be a big problem in long portable play sessions because the system in total weighs about 1 pound, which doesn't sound like too much. But after laying in bed for a few hours, propping it up, or playing something fast-paced, you're going to be adjusting a lot. You're going to be adjusting your position, you're going to be adjusting your grip. It's noticeable. Power button is essentially the same, volume 2. Vents fire out of the top, which makes much more sense for cooling. You wouldn't want jet flames shooting down at your business. Headphone jack and USB-C at the top, alongside a cartridge port. The port's door is much better designed, extending outward, and is bendable. The USB-C up top is there for charging while portable, and the one at the bottom can also charge and be used for the dock. Some have suggested charging through both ports, and as someone who has had retro devices in the past that have multiple charging ports, this is a terrible idea. I think you'll probably just end up shorting the system if you do that, and I will not be the guinea pig testing that. I'm much more of a chinchilla or a hamster. Along the bottom is the down-firing speakers, which might seem weird because you're probably used to speakers on the front of your devices, but I've gotten used to this from my Retro Pocket 3. The speakers on the Switch 2 have much more depth and dimension than the Retro Pocket 3 does though. On the back is a kickstand that extends all the way from the left side to the right side and can pop out to just about any angle. The launch Switch had a single small leg and a stiff wind could blow it down. One of the viewers on one of the videos that I posted said, "It looks like cheap garbage made in China." Just a second, if you're watching this, look to your left and then slowly rotate your head all the way to the right. Everything you just saw was made in China. Everything you own is cheap Chinese garbage. Second, the stand is excellent. Internal memory is 256 gigabytes, which is a bit short. The Xbox Series, I believe, is 512 for the Series S, but 256 for a portable system isn't that bad, but nowadays we live in a world of SD cards that can go up to a terabyte, so they probably could have fit a terabyte on there, but if you do add an SD card, there is a port for it. It is underneath the kickstand, just like all the other Switches. Just make sure you use an EX card. The controls. The shoulders and triggers extend around the entire top corner of the Joy-Con. This matches the natural curvature of your index fingers, so it's pretty comfortable, and I think the size of the buttons will be more comfortable for kids too. So if your little kid hands can't reach all the way up, you can still press the bumpers no problem. The triggers continue to not be triggers. You can't half press them like an Xbox controller. This is probably just another sacrifice for portability because full triggers would require a thicker device along the top end of the Joy-Con. They're comfortable enough, they're fine. Analog sticks continue to not be Hall effect. The new sticks are supposed to be better, but only time will tell if they suffered a drift. You can always get a controller with Hall effect sticks later. Controllers using them are very cheap nowadays, which makes it all the more puzzling as to why the Switch 2 doesn't have them. Among all the cheap Hall effect controllers that I can think of, the 8BitDo Ultimate 2C comes to mind first, as that's my preferred controller, but I was unable to get it to sync to the system. Could be that the Ultimate 2C needs a firmware update because, the Switch isn't out until just today. Or maybe the Switch 2 needs to have an update in order to incorporate these controllers better. Side note, I really like the little red and blue rings around the sticks. The D-pad continues to not be a D-pad, but considering considering this is still a Switch, it needs the buttons to be separate, in case you decide to do 2 players with the Joy-Cons. It's fine, I understand it, but Nintendo has created some of the best D-pads ever, second only to 8-bit-do, so it feels really weird to not have a good D-pad on the left side. If I decide to replace my Joy-Cons, I'll be getting a pair that have a little more booty to them, and with a proper D-pad. I don't have friends, so I'm not doing 2-player, so I don't really need, them to work like Joy-Cons typically do. The face buttons are also too small. While playing Mario Kart, I find imprints of the A button on my paws. They hurt after a couple races too. This is obviously more of a problem with Mario Kart than the controllers, but yeah, acceleration should be a trigger button by default. On the back of each Joy-Con, next to the triggers is a release button. This button will pop the Joy-Con out of the Switch. The Joy-Con are slotted into the system with a magnet. It's a pretty strong one too. You're not removing this without pressing the lever to release it. And the lever is very easy to activate, but it's not so easy as you'd be able to accidentally do it. However, putting this button here is like putting a fidget spinner on the controller. I can't ignore it and I can't stop myself from tapping the button. Hopefully you have better impulse control than I do. Just like the Joy-Con of yore, there are 2 shoulder buttons, but there's also a port where the system's teeth go, and this is for charging, I assume. Along the inner part of the Joy-Con is also the laser for the wireless mouse and the sync button. Lastly, the plus and minus buttons are pretty sharp. I prefer ovals or pill shapes instead, but they've been working with this minus and plus thing for a while. It's whatever. You don't press it that often. My final thoughts on the controls is that the directional buttons and the backseat buttons should be at an angle and the Joy-Con a bit wider. This would make the Switch 2 less portable, so I understand why they wouldn't do this. Since the Joy-Cons are essentially unchanged, I'll give them a 7 out of 10, with the originals being at a 6. The larger size and rounded edges definitely carry it a little bit. For comparison, I'd give my 8-bit-do Ultimate 2C a 10 out of 10. It's really the best controller I've ever played with, and I played with like Xbox, PlayStation, I played with all sorts of them. The Ultimate 2C is my favorite controller still. The accessories. Included with the system was a Joy-Con grip where you can pop in the Joy-Con and it works like a controller, just like the Switch one, where you could slide it into the controller dock. It also came with rails that were attached to wrist straps, just like the Switch one. The controller dock is very similar to the original, except it lacks the rounded palm rests on the outer edges. That's because the Joy-Cons don't slide into rails anymore, they have to come in from the sides. It's fine, they work, but the controller grip is still technically worse than the Switch one's version. The wrist straps are much longer, and the plastic bits snap on with no issue. They lock automatically, and if you try to yank it from the bottom, you will not be able to remove it from the Joy-Con. But when pulled from the top, they pop off with just a little bit of force, so don't yank from the top if you do that. The dock. I like the new design. It's rounded at the back and is giving a sort of forbidden monument to a forgotten god kind of feeling. It's very modern and enigmatic looking. The front side has a lot of space for stickers, and the back door hinges open just like the last one, except the door isn't fully attached to the back, it can just pop right off. This new rounded design tells me that it's meant to stand up, and that you should probably leave it standing up. I'm looking at you, Sakurai. I know you lay your Switch 1 dock down like a heathen. Inside the back door is a USB-C port, HDMI, and an Ethernet port, a dedicated actual Ethernet port. With the back door off, there are vents, and on the bottom, it's lots of holes for additional vents. When the Switch 2 is in the dock, it's quite loose. I think they did this because the first docks could scratch the screen, and they decided to overcompensate, and now there's just way too much wiggle room, and this kind of worries me. This might be an issue long-term for either the port or the plug. Hopefully I'm wrong, but it is a possibility. Despite the extra vents and wiggle room, the Switch 2 still manages to get quite warm. Not enough to hurt you, but almost enough to be concerning. This might have been my fault though, as I'll explain in the game section. Switch 2 games. I only received one game, as I'm mostly getting the Switch 2 for the improved performance on Switch 1 titles, but after playing Mario Kart, I think I've changed my mind. I got the Mario Kart bundle. I don't like racing games, but I thought pre-orders would be harder to get, so I pre-ordered the more expensive bundle, thinking it increased my chances of getting the system. Thankfully, Nintendo has done a great job with stock, making lots of systems in advance, which is really good news considering the GameStop in Staten Island decided to use staples and punctured the boxes directly through to the screens. I don't know why you'd use a stapler on a box holding an electronic device. Even if it's not the screen there, you still risk damaging something. But they blame Nintendo for it. Oh well, that's an entirely separate story. I'm not going to go on that tangent any longer. But yeah, maybe don't use sharp metal puncture thing on electronics. Anyway, I'll be doing a separate review for Mario Kart, but all I have to say is, this is the most fun I've had playing Mario Kart since Double Dash. As for concerns about free roam taking over the game, it's not an issue. Free roam is more like an optional extra mode that you you probably won't play at all. It's not even a menu option. You have to press the plus button on the main menu to access it. It's far from being the main mode. I know some people were concerned that they were just making another open world game. Not everything has to be open world, and it's good to know that Nintendo sees it as a bonus mode, not the main mode. Some also had additional concerns that the maps being bigger would make the courses less challenging and fun. Yes, the courses are more simple, but they are much longer. Some maps don't involve laps at all, but rather a long stretch of, well, it's kind of like a highway, but there's lots of twists and turns still, just not sharp ones. But I still find the game to be quite fun, and I had a big smile on my face the whole time I was playing. Switch 1 games. The performance increase on games is noticeable and downright spectacular for some. No More Heroes 3, as I mentioned in a previous post, is one of the worst running games on the Switch 1, with frame rates low enough to be counted on occasion. The port to the Xbox Series didn't fix it, but somehow, the improved hardware from the Switch 2 resulted in better performance, until I pressed the home button and it froze and crashed. Alright, so that test is done. The game froze. The game froze when I pressed the home button. System doesn't want to turn off either. Oh, the system is hot. Screen's black. Oh, it is really, really hot, actually. It's not like burning hot, it's just way warmer than it should be. Okay, it does run better on the Switch 2, but the Switch 2 does not agree with my choice to play it. It crashed just trying to open the home menu. Let's try that again. It hard crashed. I checked my system and it was disturbingly warm. I don't blame the Switch 2 for this. Like I said, it's potentially my fault for trying to run this terrible performing game in it, and possibly Suda51's fault for just really bungling the release of this game. It's poorly optimized for the Switch 1. It was ported badly to the Xbox Series where it ran worse, and on the Switch 2, it made my system's heart stop temporarily until I performed CPR. I don't think No More Heroes 3 can be fixed. I think it's flawed to its core, but that's more of an issue with the game and not the system. There were rumors that the Switch 2 couldn't play most Switch 1 games. I tested 23 different games, all physical, and after their updates they ran perfectly fine. I didn't encounter a single game that couldn't run, but I also had nothing but games from big name developers. The Switch 2 did have more in store for multiple first-party titles in the form of Switch 2 enhancements. The only game I owned with enhancements was Pokemon Scarlet. The update to this, though, was massive. Not only did it run at a consistent 60 FPS, but it had greatly improved graphics. I can clearly see every single hair on Coraiden's butt cheeks, and still get 60 FPS. This made me mention on stream something about the hardware. I said, some were speculating that because of the hardware that the Switch 2 may have began development in 2020 during COVID. With Game Chat being what it is, you know, something that would be great to use during COVID, and Scarlet being released in 2022, I think this might actually be the case. Based on Scarlet's performance, I don't think it was meant to come out on the Switch 1. I feel the same way about Tears of the Kingdom and many other late Switch 1 games that don't perform so well now. I really think that they were meant to come out on the Switch 2, but they released them early as the Switch 2 was not done yet and stalled because of COVID. In short, yes. All of your Switch 1 games are better on the Switch 2. SMT5 didn't chug, neither did Disgaea 6. Scarlet is finally what it was meant to be, and yeah, I'm very happy about the system. I now have over 20 games that I've barely played. It's like Christmas, except I don't have to worry about whether I'll be able to pay bills for the next 3 months. Just the next 1 month, because, you know, the Switch 2 is still expensive. Game Chat. This was a feature that I wasn't planning to test, but people asked me, and I happen to have a viewer that I trust who offered to join me. So thank you, Dragon Fanatic, for helping me test it. I wasn't expecting it. Game Chat is essentially Discord screen sharing. You show your screen, and your friends show theirs. If you have cameras and mics enabled, they will show you. Mics have noise suppression. Cameras won't work with just any camera, though. I tried a Logitech webcam in the standard USB port, and it didn't work. So I think it has to be a USB-C specific camera. Some cool features, though, are the accessibility functions. You can enable speech to text, where Switch will transcribe what you say and put it into the text chat. It's not the most accurate, but surprisingly it's more accurate than YouTube's auto captions. There is also text to speech, where things typed into the chat are read aloud. I did not test that, but these features are great. Accessibility is always a win. I was actually pretty impressed by Game Chat. Sure, the previews don't run at 60 FPS, but your stuff still runs perfectly fine. My thoughts are, Game Chat isn't a feature for adults. We're going to use Discord. But as someone who used Discord for a long time now, it's not safe for kids. I've had to ban my fair share of pedophiles from Discord groups, so trust me on this. Discord isn't for kids. And honestly, while Discord is better in a lot of ways, I'd rather have children stick to game chat. It's much safer for them, and I imagine Nintendo's going to do a lot more about enforcing rules than, other places. And besides, by having a paid service, you're a lot less likely to have someone show their ding-dong on the camera because they don't want to pay for a service just to get banned from it, and then, potentially get their system banned. From the mindset that game chat is for kids, it's great. Perfect even. I can imagine a young boy whose parents are divorced. He can only see his dad every other weekend. Having a Switch 2 and game chat means he can spend more time with his dad and in a safe environment for them both. For something you can relate to, remember the pandemic. Remember how we were all trapped inside, depressed, alone, isolated? How great would this have been back then? It's a great feature, even if it isn't 4K Ultra HD penis exploder quality. Setup. Setting up your system can be very quick if you've been using your Switch 1 in recent years, but if you're like me and it's been collecting dust, then things might take a while. Setup involved just turning on the system, installing the Day 1 update, then doing the system transfer. I was going to test what the system is like without the Day 1 update, but unfortunately, if I didn't do the system transfer, it said I would never be able to, so I had to set up internet in order to do that, which meant I had to get the Day 1 update. I assume I could factory default it, but for $500, I didn't want to risk it. So I set up the net, downloaded the Day 1 update, and then I did the system transfer. The update took about 15 minutes, and the transfer basically transferred all my profiles, games, saves, and ownership over to the Switch 2. After this, my Switch 1 could only play games if they were physical or if I used the virtual card system. Virtual cards are basically like borrowing digital games from a friend. If my Switch 2 is my main console, but my profile is on a second system, you can borrow games from the Switch 2 system. It's annoying. They can easily verify that I own both of these systems, but either way, once you download the game, you don't need the internet to access the game anymore. So I really didn't keep my Switch 1 after this. My brother lives next door. Their most recent video game system is an Xbox 360, and I decided to give it to him. I think it'll be a lot more appreciated over there for him and his kid. The transfer, of course, did take quite a while, but virtual game cards are very quick to transfer, but I'd say from out of box to playing, you can expect 30 minutes to an hour of setup. The snacks. As previously mentioned, included with my Switch 2 was a Coca-Cola and a can of Hot Ones Rojo flavored Pringles. People call Coca-Cola where I'm from Pop. I heard people in America's Michigan also call soda that. I wonder if people from Michigan are also aliens. The Coca-Cola tasted as you'd expect. It's not anything new. You know what Coca-Cola tastes like. The Pringles, however, were very surprising. Walmart had no way of knowing that I actually like spicy food. If they didn't know, then this would be a pretty cruel gift. As someone who enjoys spicy Korean foods like buldak, which is roast chicken and pain flavored, I thought these chips were painfully spicy too. Do you think the shopper was jealous and tried to poison me with spicy? Maybe, but I like spicy and the thank you note was nice, so I eated them. The note too. Waste not, want not. Final notes. There is, of course, quite a bit that I was negative about, but these were primarily minor issues that most wouldn't even care about. This is just something that happens when you over-scrutinize things, and you've been doing this for a while. I've been in game journalism and stuff like that for a pretty long time, so I'm used to being nitpicky about this kind of stuff. Most of you won't care about this kind of thing. It's just little things I noticed that probably won't have a larger impact. Overall, I'm very happy with the Switch 2 so far, but it's literally been a day. If I change my mind about it, I'll make an update to this video by making a new video that isn't an update, just a new video with my opinions. I didn't get around to trying Switch Online and emulation yet. I did just spend $550 on a console, so I'm going to be playing it offline for a little bit. But if emulation and online work perfectly fine for Switch 1, it'll be fine on the Switch 2 as well. I'm very pleasantly surprised by the size of everything. It's very nice, very bright screen. People say it's a crappy screen, you know? It's perfectly fine. I don't see an issue with it. It's not an OLED, but I mean... I think video quality is getting so high nowadays that I really can't tell the difference between one resolution and another. Like, if you put 1080p and 4K next to each other on such a small screen, I don't think I'd be able to see a difference. You can't really see a difference between these big resolutions until they're blown up onto really big screens. So I think the screen is perfectly fine. And if you don't like it, just put it on your 4K TV. It comes with the dock. But I also appreciate the performance in just about every regard. Even the shop loads faster. Still a little slow for my liking, but it doesn't take 17 seconds to look at a game anymore. Very nice. Anyway, that'll be it for me. Thanks for reading, watching, liking, subscribing, and all the things you do. If you watch this, then check out my blog on nimzynova.com, and I will see you later. Bye. Bye 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 bye.